New numbers are scheduled to be released tomorrow on the number of immigrants apprehended by Customs and Border Protection officers in fiscal 2020. And the numbers are expected to be down sharply from last year. Cronkite News reporter Carolina Hassett brings us a preview from our Washington bureau.
Border Patrol officials will release the final 2020 numbers in Tucson, where they are expected to be joined by Donald Trump Jr. And while there are any number of factors behind the drop in migrants, experts point to one thing that has affected almost everything else this year: the COVID-19 pandemic. The number of migrants apprehended at the southern border plummeted in fiscal 2020, a drop experts attribute to fears of COVID-19 and the economic havoc it caused.
In 2020, we have the, COVID-19, we have the recession that resulted from COVID-19, so there's just less of a reason to come here in the first place.
Final numbers will be released Wednesday, but are on track to be less than half of the more than 977,000 people caught trying to cross the border illegally in fiscal 2019.
It being fairly pandemic-induced because of elevated fears and lack of economic opportunity in the places where they would have maybe sought out to go before.
At least part of the drop is policy-driven. The Trump administration's migrant protection protocols force some immigrants to wait in Mexico for processing. And COVID-19 has limited border crossings from Mexico and Canada to essential travel only.
The U.S. has the technical ability to close its borders when it needs to, like a pandemic, when it is not a wise time for people to be moving in long distances.
It is also due to the unusually high number of border crossers last year. The 400,000 apprehended in the first 11 months of this year is much closer to the total stopped from 2015 to 2018. Experts think this latest drop may not last long.
People who were struggling before the pandemic are likely struggling even more now and are going to see that as a reason to migrate.
Others believe that whichever way the numbers go could have a lot to do with who wins on Election Day.
We have an election coming up, and it depends who is going to be in office come January and what the policies of that administration might be.
If the Trump administration wins a second term, then I think these agreements can continue.
But Narasta thinks factors depressing migration are only temporary, and that people will soon want to come to the U.S. again, and they will find a way.
Well, I think that any kind of decline this year is merely temporary. People still want to come to the United States, and there are still very few legal ways to do so.
Fiscal 2019 was an outlier, and this year's numbers are on track to return to levels of the previous 4 years, when total apprehensions ranged between 415 and 550,000 migrants. In Washington, Carolina Hassett, Cronkite News.